Thank you. Well, first of all, good afternoon. May I say that both it's on and I'm greatly humbled for this distinguished panel. And thank you to you, Helen, first of all, for convening it. I enjoyed wherever Sally was disappeared. Today she is. I know too well Sally's efforts in this regard. And I also pay tribute to my dear friend and colleague who met us shot out as she's taken the chair, Baroness Liz Sugg. I know she is. She's getting herself a coffee, which she's perfectly entitled to. But Liz also, as a former minister, and I know of her strong advocacy, and I can see various parliamentarians like London. So I mean, there she is. They're all getting coffee. I assure you, that's not what the people in the House of Commons do. There's more work going on, but I'm delighted, and with other parliamentarians to be here. Also, I make tribute with Sonia, who leads up things on Harriet, and all those others who are here on my really dedicated team of experts. They do tremendous amount of work, and my sincere thanks to them. What brings us together, of course, in recognising the panel around me, and that you, like yourself, acknowledge first and foremost Dr. Ale Tecker, for your work with the hearing from Dr. Ale, and also from Dr. Conway as well. And I think it's great that we have some panelists. But I think it's really my dear friend, and I say that quite deliberately, and it means a great deal to me on this issue, which is Christina Mann. She's done a phenomenal amount of work. They often say that when you really talk about the subject, you really do become an expert. But a lot of books demonstrate Christina's expert in this subject. She is someone who really works in the front line. I know she has. And she was just saying to me briefly, she just returned from Ukraine. I'm sure we'll have her valuable insights. Christina is a journalist, of course, as a minister in government and as a politician. She challenges us rightly so much. Thank you so much for really keeping this issue on the forefront. And over the last 6 years, I have had great joy in working with so many people. But I also want to particularly acknowledge people such as Nadia Moran, who gave her name to Morocco, which I'll come on to in a moment, but also Dr. Dennis Mukwege, and all of those who work in the Mukwege Foundation. As someone who recently visited the DRC, I saw firsthand again the incredible work that he's doing on the ground. But as Helen said in her opening remarks, what brings us together is today, this day. You would rather this day did not exist. But the fact is, it's a reality of the world we are in. And it's a abhorrent crime, and anyone who's met the incredible survivors of such crimes will know what it does in terms of changing not just the lives of the individual, of their family, but their community, their nation, and the world as a whole. When this initiative of preventing sexual violence and preventing this scheme was started over 10 years ago by the then foreign secretary, we didn't know which direction it would take. But it is a fact with change that happens around you that this remains a key government priority. And a decade on, this remains as a priority that we, United Kingdom government, are very much focused on. Whether in my capacity as a minister or as I lead this agenda as the PM Special Representative, yes, there have been different prime ministers, and they underline the importance that each prime minister has come in and endorsed the importance of this particular issue when it comes to the challenges we face around the globe. And not for a moment do I need reminding anyone who's been involved in this issue for so many years about the importance of what we do in terms of our advocacy. But most importantly, at the heart of our approach must be the incredible survivors. They've been inspiring. Many of the initiatives which we now see in practical terms unfolding are because of the experiences and the insights that survivors have provided to policymakers. And I'm delighted that back in 2019, I was able to appoint 2 of those very survivors, Nadine and Kolbasia, here. I acknowledge their input, 2 survivors, a woman and a man, both survivors of sexual violence and conflict, who advised us directly in terms of our strategy program. And it's sort of the coining the phrase, let's put survivors at the heart of what we do. I hope we've demonstrated that's exactly what it's done, or what the UK government has done in terms of our policy making as well. There's been action, it's not just about words. And over the past decade, just to share some facts with you, we supported projects on this particular agenda in 29 countries. These have included safe shelters in Bosnia, Herzegovina, judicial support in Iraq. I was there a couple of couple of months ago, and I'm delighted also that in recent years we've seen the involvement of Her Royal Highness, now the Duchess of Edinburgh, and her convening power and connectivity on the world stage has also been crucial, particularly in the relationship she herself has forged with survivors, and I pay tribute to her work in this respect as well. And of course, many of you attended our national conference in November last year, which brought together over 1,000 delegates. Most importantly, we brought together survivors. I remember the eve of the conference, meeting survivors directly, and for many it was the first time they were connecting with each other from different countries. Never can there be a more crucial convening role for a government in facilitating survivors coming together, sharing insights, experiences, but most importantly, knowing, as one of them said to me, that we're not alone. And indeed, it's them who matter the most as we seek to build stability and put this crime into the history books. A total of 53 countries at that conference signed a political declaration setting out next steps, and of course 14 countries, 40 made concrete commitments. We also have a strategy. We've allocated money, new financing of 12.5 billion in support of this, and I was delighted during the conference, and indeed we've already convened our first meeting. We put down a marker. We established an international alliance on preventing sexual violence and conflict. Now, I've been a minister for several years now, 6 years or so, at the Foreign Office, in all its guises, both as a joint minister across Vivid and the Foreign Office, and now as a minister at the FCDO. And I've seen the leadership that countries show, including our own, whether it's on freedom of religion, freedom, and the same on PSBI and preventing sexual violence. When we establish alliances, there's a marker we put down. They then exist, irrespective of political change, which happens, we all accept that. The important thing is that this has been cross-party, this has been across both houses, and as illustrated again today in the meeting, that Helen has convened, that I'm delighted to be joining her today, because it matters. Why? Because it matters to each and every one of us. It's the right human thing to be doing and to be involved in. Now, this alliance is new, but it brings together a whole raft of different countries, and it asks countries now to step up and be counted. That as we look together in terms of our advocacy and lobbying on conflicts around the world, both past, current, and who knows, future conflicts that arise, we try and really put that preventing element of sexual violence into perspective. And what have we done subsequently? The Morocco that I alluded to earlier, that was inspired by engagement directly with survivors. Now, some of you have visited Iraq. I've been to Iraq a few times. But on my first visit back in 2018, I went just after the liberation of Mosul, and I met with a group of Yazidi women survivors. I was delighted that my dear friend Ramila Platinum, who I also leads on this agenda as the UN Special UN Secretary General Special Representative on conflict-related sexual violence, we visited Mosul together. Daesh had just left the state. But Your Excellencies, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to go into the specific details of what some of the survivors shared, but it's the most gruesome account of what they experienced. So much so that they have been drained of emotion of what they felt as a fundamental human being. If I just caption one lady's story in as much as saying she had lost a child, the gruesome circumstances of how she lost that child, what she had to endure, as she put it to me, the multitude of rapes that she had to suffer, put that into absolute subsequent consequence compared to what happened to her child. I will say no more, but I leave you on that thought, on that particular issue, because it matters. And therein, working with the likes of survivors such as Martin, being a Yazidi survivor, the Moran Code was born also, because it was about putting survivors first. I visited a camp in the Rohingya camps in Bangladesh in the Cox's Bazar. What was a tourist destination for Bangladeshis has now turned into a home for fleeing Rohingya community of over 1 million plus. But as one of the women said to me there, a young woman of about 26 or 27, she said that age that she quoted to me was exactly the number of times she had to give her testimony of the multitude of rapes and abuse she had to suffer. And what was she told after those 27 occasions of giving testimony? Well, your testimony number 13 and 15 and 21 is that. So So I'm really sorry we can't take the place forward because it doesn't stack up. And that is why we need instruments such as the Morale Code to ensure that countries step up, they adopt, and what that does is protect survivor testimonies. All of you here present who are involved, who are passionate about this subject, whether you're working as a well-meaning NGO, working as a minister, whether you're working as a parliamentarian, when you're going in and talking to incredible survivors, the most important thing we must all adhere to is protecting their testimonies. And the Morale Code does exactly that. So when that prosecution happens, that testimony is protected, perpetrators can be brought to account. We've also invested in examples of protecting testimony further through, we're working currently, for example, with the International Criminal Court on looking at virtual reality, how we can create the absolute abhorrent experience, but so those who are giving verdict on these trials realize what the survivor, to some extent, went through. We want to protect the identity of survivors because it's central. What takes, and it is predominantly tragically young women and girls who go through this ordeal, but young men as well, that they not only have to survive that ordeal, then they have to talk about it, then they have to relate it, it gets recorded. And then we see incredible people such as the likes of Nadine, of, who come forward, such as Kolabasi, such as Nadia Murad, who become the most powerful advocates for what they have endured. And it is our duty to stand by them as well. There are many things I can recount in the time we have today, so I will limit my comments. But this is never a job done. It requires everyone working together, parliamentarians, ministers, NGOs, advocates, and I pay tribute to the incredible work, as I said at the start, of Dr. McQuaid. Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Edinburgh, and I, the back end of last year, went to the DRC. We saw the incredible work which over successive governments we supported, both the Labour government previously helped to establish that, and the government now continues this important work. But most importantly, at the centre of that is the inspiration of Dr. McQuaid as well. That's why people like Nadia and Dr. McQuaid were recognised for their work through Nobel Prizes. But they don't do it for Nobel Prizes. Dr. McQuaid could earn millions for the work he does, as would you, sir, in terms of the incredible service you provide these survivors of sexual violence. But you know what, ladies and gentlemen, again, to put it into context, as we were walking around with Her Royal Highness, some of the young survivors, victims were there. One young girl did. She was 4 years old. She had been raped several times. And apart from her father, any male she saw, boy or man, she constituted as someone who would cause harm to her. And I assure you this, that shrill scream that echoed around that hospital embeds itself in your mind. There can be no other, you can't relate to that experience unless, of course, you are an incredible courageous survivor yourself. But it stays with you. And that is what is important. And I say that with absolute conviction and commitment. That's because of that little girl, that 4-year-old girl. And you know what Dr. McQuaid said to me? He put his arm on my shoulder and he said, Harry, the youngest victim I've had for operation was 6 months old, a young girl. So in the work we do, and in praising again the theme of this meeting, the day we mark, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of collaboration, collective action. But most importantly, if there's one goal, anyone who perhaps is coming to this subject as new, or in terms of the advocacy made clear beyond the rounds of Parliament, but out there in the field, whether we're talking about the Rohingyas, whether we're talking about the legacy of Bosnia-Herzegovina, whether we're talking about the current crisis we're facing in Sudan, or indeed the conflicts which are raging, including right here on our continent in 2023 in Ukraine. That phrase is still used as a weapon of war. Women, girls, men, and boys are subjected to the worst kind of horrors. And it is for us to ensure that we play our part in not only protecting them when we can, ensuring their testimonies are heard, and ultimately through the accountability mechanisms, the investment we debate nationally justice mechanism through the work we do collaboratively that we ultimately hold that approaches to account. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I want to move straight now to our second speaker. I'd like all of our speakers to be a little bit mindful of the time. We have quite a heavy agenda. Without further ado, Stephen, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks also to Helen and Sally for organising this, and also to my for his kind words. And he is a great time himself of various governments years, and thank God he has. I don't think we've ever been more dedicated and passionate about this subject. As he mentioned, I'm literally just come back yesterday from Ukraine, and if any of you saw the Sunday Times on Sunday, you might have seen the horrific story that I wrote about male Ukrainian soldiers, prisoners of war, who were castrated by Russian soldiers when they drunk. And talk a lot about sexual violence against women. We don't often talk about sexual violence against men. I've previously reported on the rape in Ukraine of Russian soldiers, and it is incredibly shocking to see the same thing happening in 2023 as what I wrote about in interviews with people about what the Red Army did during the liberation of Berlin back in 1945, and hearing those same kind of stories. But the only thing I would say is I've been struggling often to cover this subject as a journalist. I've had editors literally say to me, nobody wants to read about this. Many editors, I would say. And I think that Ukraine has changed this for the first time. It's a terrible thing that country is having to go through this, but it's very positive. It is the first time that it's really been reported on, and we're really seeing a lot of international outrage, and I really hope that that translates into action for everyone on this issue, and it stops being the world's most neglected war crime, which it absolutely is. And it's great to see the UK government today introduce sanctions on perpetrators of sexual violence. But it is just a start. Accountability is the exception, as many of you know, not the rule. And what we're seeing around the world, and I see it as a reporter going to many of these places, is an absolute epidemic of sexual violence, not just in Ukraine, but Afghanistan, Central African Republic, South Sudan, Ethiopia, which we'll hear more about, and also in detention centres in Iran and Belarus. Uyghurs being held in China. So I started looking into this issue because I found as a journalist mostly covering the conflict that I kept coming across more stories of such brutality that I found hard to write and very hard to listen to. Most of us as women here will know that feeling of walking down a dark lane at night and hearing footsteps coming up behind you, being any person in a train carriage at night when a man gets in and starts coming too close to you. As we all know, globally, 1 in 3 women is going to experience sexual violence or physical violence in their lifetime. But women in conflict are experiencing far more. In some countries, 73–75% of women are experiencing this. I personally first heard about it on a big scale in the tiny Greek island of Leros during the refugee crisis in 2015 when I met some Yazidis like Tigray was talking about, and he mentioned the way all the emotions seem to be drained from them. I saw exactly that, met with women, I didn't know what happened to them. And actually, I never even met a Lizzie before that. And it was quite clear that something so terrible had happened. All the light had gone out of their eyes. They weren't even taking notice of what was happening to their small children, anything that was going on around them. Eventually, they told me that they had been abducted from their villages and taken to this place called the Galaxy Cinema, where they had been separated into ugly or beautiful or in between, and Daesh fighters had come and literally touched their heads, their hair, touched their breasts, and decided which one they wanted to take as their sex slave. I've never heard stories like that. Some of them told me that they had been sold over and over again. One of them told me 12 times. I thought it was the worst that I had ever heard. Then I met a 16-year-old girl with one of the gold peacock pendants that of the Ziggies wear, and she told me how the worst night in her life was when the guy who took her brought her 10-year-old and raped the 10-year-old next to her. Around the same time as I was reporting on what was happening to the TVs, I was also going to Nigeria a lot because you might remember Chibok girls who were taken from their school at night, more than 250 girls by Boko Haram fighters taken into the Sambisa forest. And for about 2 weeks, it was the biggest story on earth, partially because of the hashtag tracker of girls, and lots of people, famous people like Michelle Obama, were photographed holding up these hashtags. After that, everyone just forgot about it, and more than 100 of those girls, 9 years on, are still missing. I started traveling around with these Nigerians, China, Istanbul, and discovered that there was just a tip of the iceberg, that tens of thousands of girls had been taken. And even when they were rescued, often they were then being raped by the Nigerian soldiers who rescued them. Then, when they were put in camps of displaced people, they were completely ostracized by the rest of their community, who felt that they would somehow feel shame upon them, sullied. And that, to me, is one of the most heartbreaking things about this issue, that people who have had a terrible wrong done to them and made to feel as if they did something wrong, which is absolutely unforgivable. A couple of years after that, I also was in Bangladesh, which was mentioned Rohingya from Burma or Myanmar. About 700,000 people crossed the border within 3 months. And the majority of them were women and children, one after another, told stories about how they'd been dragged from their huts and tied to the trees, gang raped often in front of their children. I could not believe that this was happening on such a scale and nobody was doing anything about it. Not a single person was prosecuted for any of those things. What happens to Rohingya, what happens to these youths, what happens to the girls that were taken by Boko Haram. One of the Yazidi girls sent me a message, and she said to me in that WhatsApp message, "We told our story, but nothing changed." And I didn't know what to say to her. I felt shame as a journalist, shame as a woman, that this was happening and we weren't doing anything. And that's why I started to investigate this issue, because I could not understand why it was happening so much, that people were actually talking about it. It wasn't that people were not telling their stories, they were brave. And you had people, as what I mentioned, like Dennis McWavey, and Angela was there when that 6-month-old baby was brought in, and saw his face and how this possibly happened. Of course, Arabian War is nothing new. Go back to the ancient Greeks and Persians and Romans, it's always happened. And it's hard to think of a war where it hasn't happened. But it just seems to me in recent years, we're seeing it used much more as a weapon. People deliberately being told to go and rape women or men. And the fact is, we're not living in ancient Greek times. We are in 2023. We know that this is wrong, that this yet nothing, or not enough, is being done about it. Really is a form of genocide when those men I wrote about who were frustrated by Russians with their Russians in their knives. Those Russians said to them, "You'll never have children now." And that was the point. So as we stand here, sit here, it's happening in so many places around the world, and it was great that we were gathered here. It was great to be at the conference in November, hear so many people speak. But I'm just getting a bit fed up of being at events where people like us gather and talk about what's happening and say how terrible it is. Everybody agrees and nothing happens. I think that to start actually doing something, and the international community needs to step up and not just express out. So thank you.
Christina, now in a change to our programme, and I am going to introduce our next speaker, who is Katrin Coppins. The reason I'm going to introduce Katrin now is because she has to leave, and possibly some time ago, in fact, but she really does need to go. Katrin is the Executive Director of the Tigray Foundation, founded by the Nobel Prize-winning Dr. Tigray, who treated women survivors in the DRC. It's one of the leading organisations working in the area, and we're really honoured that Katrin has come from the Netherlands to join us today and has been able to stay. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you for organising this event, and thanks Lisa for talking. I'm happy in the way to talk after this speaker, because I really think there is a good, we talk, we invite survivors, we invite survivors to share their stories. 25 years ago, I think it's based also on the experience of Tigray in the hospital in Congo. Survivors did not dare to speak. There's major stigma. It's the husbands, it's the neighbors that do not allow or suppress survivors from coming out. And initially we felt, if survivors speak out, the world will respond. As part of the work of the Tigray Foundation, and Lisa is a SEMA member, she will talk more. But we felt it's crucial for survivors together to share their stories and speak out. And they created a global network, SEMA, that needs to speak out in strength. And we had strong hopes, as did survivors, that they would overcome their fear, the fear for stigma, that the world would respond. And unfortunately, and I think I can give many more examples of stories of survivors, but I think it's super important today, on the 19th of June, the day of elimination of conflict-related violence, to overcome this sense that nothing can be done. And I think that is why we feel, because, as you also said, these crimes do not happen accidentally. It's not a byproduct of the war. It's not collateral damage, the horrible collateral damage. And if it happens with a purpose, it can also not happen. I think we all need to believe that it's not just happening, and therefore we will sit here 20 years from now listening to again new horrible stories from yet again very brave survivors that overcome their own sense of shame and stigma. So I think that notion these crimes never happen accidentally. The choice, it's a choice to enjoy them or to tolerate them. And therefore they can be stopped. And I think in a way I'm happy to be here in the celebration of the right way, commemorate on a special day, 9th of June. And I think it's important to recognize also for us that the UK has taken a way forward in creating the prevention of violence in conflict initiative. And also there, it's for all of us, all members of parliament, politicians, what can we do to stop this? But I'm very honored to be part of that collective journey. What we're trying to do as the Tigray Foundation, together, partially with many, many others, also supporting this guy, is to clearly say this should not happen. It can be prevented. Let's draw a red line whenever sexual violence is happening. And as part of the, what we call the red line initiative, and we know there's a connotation with the red line as well. The statements about chemical weapons in Syria, but still this notion of if the world would be determined to stop and say if this happens, there will be sanctions. There will be sanctions of individuals, there will be seizing of assets, there will be severe punishments. There will be nationally, regionally, internationally. We will no longer tolerate this. What I feel is also an effect of my own humanity. It's the shame to be in the world, knowing now, today, women, men, children are being sexually abused today in Sudan, Congo, Ukraine, parts of Ethiopia. What's happening today, and that notion forced us almost to create what we call the Red Line Initiative. And as part of the Red Line Initiative, we have developed a guidebook, and the guidebook is on existing state obligations under international law to prevent and prosecute and respond to conflict-related sexual violence. Because the risk is that we all feel nothing can be done, while there is literally a whole book of like hundreds of pages already stating what states have committed to do to prevent response in the case of conflict-related sexual violence. So by having this guidebook published also today on the 19th of June, we really hope this will be a tool not only for states to be able to say this is what we are obliged to, but also for all of us that care, that refuse to accept nothing can be done, to use this guidebook as an important act. And to the maybe adding a few words on the British government and the members of parliament, because I also think it's very important to realize, particularly maybe for members of parliament, that the PSPI initiative is exceptional. And I hope the cross-party support that has been there will continue to be in place, to continue to support the various crucial initiatives. Because what we should prevent at all costs, and I'm sure again, is that too many broken promises have been made to victims and survivors. And we are waiting for more concrete action, more results, to once and for all establish clearly this red line against the use of sex.
Thank you very much indeed, Catherine. We'll let you go if you need to go. But thank you very much for staying to speak with us. I'm going to introduce our next speaker now, who is Dr. Khaled Hecker, who's come from the IDA Referral Hospital in Tigray. I'd like to touch with
Good afternoon. Very introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable members of parliament, distinguished guests. First of all, I would like to thank Peter and Kings for inviting me to have my experience in present today. My name is Dr. Khaled. I am an obstetrician in Vegas for Tigray. It's with heavy heart that I address you today on the International Day for the Elimination of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence. During the Tigray war, I worked at Tigray Hospital, the second largest hospital in Ethiopia, serving as a referral center for more than 9 million people from Tigray, Afar, neighboring districts of Amhara. Before the war broke out, Its average annual visits had been over 300,000 patients. Thousands of health science students, doctors of medicine, and specialist doctors from Tigray, from the rest of Ethiopia, from neighboring countries such as Sudan, Kenya, Somalia, and Eritrea have graduated from either and are serving in different locations in different capacities. Equipped with the latest category technologies, Idle Hospital has always been striving to become a center of excellence. Since the first shot was held on the 19th of November 2022, our work and our life took a new dimension. Starting from the first day of the war, we were disconnected from the rest of the world. Telecommunication was severe, power was interrupted, banks were closed, there was no internet, flights were suspended. All the roads going in and out of Tigray were blocked, not for 2 days, not for 2 weeks, not for 2 months, for more than 2 years. We were encircled and we were besieged. Drugs, medical equipment, and medical supplies were prevented from reaching Tigray. As a result, the hospital's drug and therapy committee approved the use of expired drugs, a dangerous but necessary calculus to suffering. We were forced to wash used gloves to reuse them in the 21st century. We asked patients to bring their own old clothes to be used as surgical clothes. Thousands of emergency surgeries were cancelled due to lack of anesthetic drugs, medical equipment, and components. Due to lack of medication and proper treatment, patients with chronic medical conditions were succumbing to their illness. Cancer patients were unable to access chemotherapy. Children suffering from acute malnutrition were admitted to the hospital, but there was lack of therapeutic food to support their recovery. With nothing at our disposal, we were left with the only option of sending patients home to them, and we were left in a distressing reality and heartbreaking task of signing death certificates. In short, one of the modern hospitals in Ethiopia, Idle Hospital, was quickly returned backwards. The consequence of this war was particularly tragic for women and girls in Tigray. Regardless of the cause of the war, women and girls paid the steepest price in this conflict. According to a recent community survey we conducted in 6 of the 7 zones of Tigray, maternal mortality ratio soared from just 186 maternal deaths per 100,000 livelihoods before the war to 840 maternal deaths per 100,000 livelihoods, corresponding to maternal mortality ratio in Ethiopia 22 years back. These staggering numbers imply that a couple of decades progress has been reversed in less than a couple of years. The costs of gender-based violence that we encountered were truly heartbreaking. The stories that I will share with you today about gender-based violence are not merely accounts that I heard. They are the lived experience of my patients, individuals whom I have witnessed, I have touched, and cared for. We saw women who had been raped repeatedly by soldiers, some of whom had been held captive for days or weeks. Many of these women had also been subject to torture, including beatings, electric shocks, and burning. We saw girls as young as 4 who had been raped by multiple men, leaving them with physical injuries and psychological scars that would last a lifetime. We also saw mothers as old as 90-year-olds who sustained multiple injuries from gender-based violence. We have heard harrowing stories of victims from those who were raped in front of their families, their partners, and their children, to those who were taken to the bushes and tied up in trees and gangrene for days. While being raped, their closest relatives and partners were forced to watch them at the gunpoint. We have had survivors whose genitals were burned. We have had mothers with foreign bodies in their genitals, sometimes writing notes or reading notes of the perpetrators. While raping them, the perpetrators told their victims that they are purifying their blood, cleaning them of their identity. It's very difficult to choose the severest forms of gender-based violence experienced by women and girls of Tigray, as there is nothing called a mild form of gender-based violence. However, one story that has stayed with me was that of a young woman who had been abducted by soldiers and held captive for several weeks. They tied her in a tree and injected her with unspecified injected drug to make her numb. They shot and killed her 12-year-old son, and they kept him around her and buried while gang-raping her for several days. When she was finally released, when she was finally came to us, she was so traumatized that she couldn't even barely speak. It was heartbreaking to see how much she had suffered. Every time she was brought for follow-up our hospital, she cries and says, I have not buried my son. I always see him in my mind, lying helplessly out there. There was another mother who was raped in the outskirts of Canada in her 10 days after delivery. The soldiers who took her away from home left her newborn child with her husband. After raping her for more than a week, they asked the husband to take his wife, but he should pay them 10,000 Ethiopian. There was also a mother who had an advanced cervical cancer, whom they raped her for days while practicing feeding. These are just a few examples of the horrors that women and girls in Tigray have subjected to. To make what makes it even more tragic is that these are not isolated incidents. Another lady tried labor at home for days. Later, she decided to go to the nearby health center. But since the nearby health center was closed, she traveled on foot to Abiy and General Hospital. But the hospital had been changed to a military camp. Then her family decided to take her to Madagascar using traditional stretchers. On their way to Madagascar, they were encountered with soldiers. The soldiers broke the traditional stretcher, beaten the men up, those who were carrying the mother, and kissed the mother. The mother was left on her own to cry, go to Madagascar. After several hours of journey, people found her and they brought her to our hospital. The mother lost her uterus due to uterine rupture, but survived to tell the story. A question that always crosses my mind is how many mothers have lost their lives through the stretchers and pelvis children. During the entire active war and siege periods, and as the only hospital providing care to women and girls, did you have family planning options? No. Did we have abortion educations? No. Did we have antibiotics for prophylaxis of sexual transmitted infections? No. Did we have antiretroviral drugs to prevent the victims from China? No. With nothing at our disposal, provisionally kept this virtual attack was sparing the possible. As a result, women and girls in Tigray have suffered from physical injuries, psychological trauma, unwanted pregnancies, and sexual transmitted infections, including HIV. Their condition has led to poverty, displacement, and food insecurity. The world knew that women and girls in Tigray were being fed a scale of severity that the world has never seen before. We know and we understand that there were people, organizations, and countries out there who had the means and the power to prevent this from happening. They chose to keep silent. Both the United Nations and the United States, on different occasions, acknowledged that women and girls in Tigray have been subjected to rape, gang rape, sexual slavery, forced marriage, and other forms of sexual and gender-based violence. However, their knowledge was followed with indifference and inaction. As Aristotle once said, the separation from law and justice makes them the worst animals and emboldens the perpetrators to keep humiliating, terrorizing, degrading, and raping the women and girls of Tigray to the extent that 120,000 women and girls are projected to have sustained one of the worst forms of sexual violence the world has witnessed before. The saddest part of the story is, even though that it has been months since the peace agreement was signed, these victims have gotten neither service nor justice, neither access nor redress, neither reparation nor protection. The victims of gender-based violence in the soul are yet to see if justice is served. With despair and hopelessness, women and girls persistently tell us that they would rather have died instead of surviving with so much humiliation. In most of parts of Tigray, laboring mothers are still being transported on the back of their families or traditional stretchers to healthcare institutions. The referral line remains open. As a result, mothers in Tigray are still needlessly dying from preventable causes. Before I conclude my speech on this International Day for the Elimination of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence, I ask you also to remember Rohingya, Ukrainian, Uyghur, Yazidi, and many other women who have faced a shared destiny with the women of Tigray. We understand and feel that they have also. The women of Tigray and other victims of conflict-related sexual violence have been stripped of their dignity, their safety, and their future. The women and girls demand accountability from the perpetrators. Only by the provision of justice and accountability can we hope to achieve lasting peace, and prevent similar future violences. The world must not remain silent or indifferent to the suffering women in Tigray and beyond England. To the esteemed Prime Minister Special Representative for Preventing Sexual Violence and Conflict, Tariq Ahmed, and all others present here today, appreciating the commitment so far, I implore you to hear our plea to act decisively and to advocate for the rights and well-being of the survivors in Tigray and everywhere. The survivors in Tigray and other affected regions are counting on your leadership, your influence, and your dedication to bring about finding change. It's not enough to merely acknowledge their plight. We implore you to take concrete action that will bring them the justice and the support they desperately need. The world must stand in solidarity with women and girls of Tigray and with victims of gender-based violence anywhere and demand justice, peace, and dignity for all. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Dr. Hannah. Can I just say how important it is for us all to have your testimony here today, and also just pay tribute to you and your team for everything that you have done to support women and girls in Tigray in what clearly have been absolutely impossible our final speaker in this first panel, Evelina Ocha. Thank you very much. And I'll start with a message from Laurel, who could not join us today. Every year in this house, mark the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence and Conflict, and rarely a day passes when I am not made aware of the pain and sorrows of women and girls, but also men and boys, who are subject in so many parts of the world to this horrific crime. You might imagine that in 2023, the crime of sexual violence and conflict would have been confined to history books, but sadly, you would be wrong. It is not. Quite the reverse. All the evidence suggests that the crime is on the increase. Earlier this year, I chaired the Darfur inquiry, which 20 years after the genocide of 2003 was asked to look into the new wave of atrocities in Darfur. As the inquiry proceeded, we repeatedly heard evidence of shocking atrocities in Darfur, including stories of rape and sexual violence. As I was launching the Darfur inquiry and the Darfur report, the situation in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, was deteriorating. Once more, horrific reports of the use of rape and sexual violence have emerged. The Combating Violence Against Women and Children unit documented at least 49 assaults in the first 2 weeks of the Sudan's new conflict. So many more of these crimes remain undocumented. In Tigray, for instance, due to the shutdown of internet and phone communications and the banning of international journalists from entering the region, we still have no idea of the true scale and nature of the use of rape and sexual violence in the 2-year-long war. This evidence is here to be collected and presented internationally. In November 2022, we all welcomed the ceasefire in Ethiopia, with the great hope that this would be the end of the horrific atrocities against the Tigrayans, where the use of rape and sexual violence was a common weapon of war. Unfortunately, it did not take a day to pass before that hope was replaced by new reports in international media outlets of the use of rape and sexual violence.
Add to this the reports of Putin's troops subjecting Ukrainians to this crime and reports of similar atrocities by the Burmese military against Rohingyas and other minorities. For what suffering has been inflicted on the Yazidis in Iraq, you can see the global reach, the use of sexual violence, terrorized and subject. This crime has become so common that it no longer causes outrage, which it should, and there should be outrage. We are part of the international community, and we must ask ourselves, why are we not doing far more to address a crime that should be consigned to the history books? If anyone here in Parliament tells you that we are doing all we can, don't believe them. Demand more action. It is not enough for the UK to throw big conferences if there is no follow-up. It is not enough for the UK to throw big conferences if many victims and survivors are excluded from the event and cannot raise their voices. It is not enough for the UK to throw big conferences if at that event perpetrators are given a platform where victims has been excluded. We need to give ourselves a reality check and admit that the legal mechanisms available to address the issue of rape and sexual violence in war are fully inadequate. We need to admit that we need more comprehensive approaches and not only focus on implementation. Implementation of the currently available weak mechanisms will not bring about the change that is needed. And above all, we need to hear the voices of victims and survivors. And this is a message that Lord Alden sends from the. And I just want to briefly add 4 quick messages. Lord Alden mentioned the Darfur Inquiry. And indeed, the Darfur Inquiry published its report in April this year. And unfortunately, at that time, the situation in Darfur, but also in Khartoum, was escalated. And in recent days, we've seen more and more evidence of atrocities, including sexual violence, not only in Darfur, but also in Khartoum and other parts of Sudan. So this issue will require other attention. A few days ago, Brendan O'Hara and he was here a moment ago, launched a new inquiry, the Tigray inquiry, that is to look into the atrocities perpetrated in Tigray since November 2020. And not only till the ceasefire in 2022, but also the ongoing atrocities. And indeed, we hear on a daily basis new reports of the use of rape and sexual violence in the region. So this requires urgent attention. And this week will be also hearing from a number of people working with survivors and taking their testimonies that will then become part of the report. And earlier, we've heard also about Dr. Mukwege's incredible work in the Red Line Initiative. This is a message that needs to be seen. Obviously, we are not doing enough on prevention. This is something that needs to be addressed. The Red Line Initiative is the way forward. Maybe we need a COP-style approach to the issue of sexual violence as well. And indeed to treat it as if the world is on fire. Because the world is on fire when the victims of rape and sexual violence. And it needs to be treated as that. And last message in terms of justice and accountability. We're talking here about rape and sexual violence success. We're talking about not only war crimes, but also humanity, but also genocide. And in terms of addressing those international crimes, we need to remember that we have a shared responsibility to prosecute the perpetrators. It's not only for the courts in countries where the atrocities have been perpetrated, very often this option is not available or inadequate. It's not only for international tribunals, again, very often this option is. We all have a shared responsibility, including here in the UK. But then in the UK, courts cannot prosecute perpetrators of international crimes perpetrated outside of the UK. If the perpetrators are not UK citizens of UK residents. So this is a massive failure of UK law that needs to be addressed. And this is again what all has been working on. Ernest Kennedy, Brendan O'Hara has been trying to work on over recent months. So hopefully you'll be able to join us in this joint effort. Thank you very much.
We have for very good reasons slightly overrun on time on this panel. I do want us to have a very short break. We have heard a lot on this panel. I think it's important to have the opportunity to go and get a drink of water, a cup of tea, coffee if you need it. But if I could just ask if everybody could be seated again within about 8 minutes, that would be very, very, very helpful in terms of managing
Please take a seat. We're going to start again. So thank you very much everybody for being brisk in getting refreshments and taking your seats. Okay, yeah, absolutely. We are extremely tight on time this afternoon, and I'm very sorry about that. The content is so important and also often so distressing to listen to. But we are not going to be on with that. So I am going to ask our speakers in the second panel please to be as brisk as you can. And if everybody can stick to a limit of 5 minutes, that means that we'll be able to hear from everybody. And I can promise you that everybody on the second panel has got very, very important things to say. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce the first of our speakers this afternoon, who is my friend, the Honourable Member Lynn Brown, the Shadow Minister for Africa, who has been for many, many years a strong and vocal supporter of the campaign against sexual violence in conflict, and also a friend of many of the communities and organisations represented here today. And I know it's an extremely difficult day for you to know your session today, so exceptionally grateful to you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. And first of all, I'd like to thank you, Helen, and to Sally for organising this event, and all the experts and survivors who are giving us their powerful testimonies. Sexual violence anywhere is a crime that I think it's probably impossible to recover from. The impact on the victims, families, friends and communities is often devastating. It is no ordinary weapon of war. It tortures and it terrorises, and the effect of it lingers, always. It destroys lives, it destroys families. It comes from and reinforces the inequalities that hold back women and girls, and hold back men and boys too. Sexual violence is often used to perpetuate racism, classism, and ethnic and religious hatred. It is one of our most appalling of crimes, and its impact must never be overlooked or ignored, because it is a devastation. Last week I heard again about horrors taking place right now in Genina in West Darfur, and let me quote what I read. When they rape the women, and they rape all the women and the girls they can find, they say, we will change the DNA of this place. That language is simply appalling, and sadly, it had echoes of language used in other conflicts, at other places, and other times, including the Tigray conflict. As Shadow Minister for Africa, I know of the total inadequacy of the international responses to violations and atrocities that are taking place right now. In Sudan, we can see there's almost no positive steps for accountability for these crimes or others. There doesn't seem to be a way to stop the violence that simply isn't being shut down by international divisions. The motion for UN rights monitors passed with scant support, and on the Security Council, the UN's mission inadequate mandate was extended, but that hasn't stopped the special representative being shut out of the country. To be frank, there's little trust in the consistency and the good intent of the UK, the EU, and the US. All the conditions are there for this horrific violence to continue targeting women and girls and the most vulnerable people in the world. So I believe we need to reckon with these challenges strategically and work out what we can really do about it. I think we need to do better at supporting the local organisations and understand what works best, who will work effectively and efficiently and use scarce resources wisely. And that's the message that I got loud and clear when I attended the PSVI conference last November. Locally works better. I also think we need to better resource and coordinate those identifying perpetrators. And maybe what we need to do is to use sanctions more widely for more of those responsible for allowing or directing sexual violence in the conflict. Because it's more than a decade since the PSVI agenda was launched. And I think we should acknowledge that some progress has been made with international recognition of this horrendous crime. But as we stand here, the violations continue in Sudan, in the DRC, and across the world. And the survivors of this violence in Ethiopia have seen little progress on justice. So I think we need to be honest about the complex barriers that stand in the way of protection, accountability, and prevention. In this room, we have a wealth of knowledge, and I want to learn how we prevent future abuses more effectively so that when we are in government, and hopefully that isn't too far off, we can be a better friend to the most vulnerable in this world. We're going to need to continue in perseverance and continue in focus, because tackling and beating this is going to be a long haul. But I'm here to tell you that I and the Labour Party are committed to rejuvenating the UK's leadership if we win the coming election. And I want to work together on what that refreshed agenda looks like. Thank you.
Really, really appreciate you being here today. I'm now going to move on swiftly to our next panelist, Lisa Garvey from the Commonwealth Collective, representing the global network of victims and survivors to end wartime sexual violence. Thank you, Lisa. The honourable members of Parliament, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Today, June 19th, we are here to observe the United Nations Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict. I express my heartfelt gratitude to Honourable Member of Parliament Helen Hayes for hosting this important parliamentary event. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on behalf of SEMA. I'm a SEMA member. SEMA is the global network of victims and survivors to end wartime sexual violence that gathers victims and survivors of sexual violence in armed conflicts from now 26 countries and 6 continents, acting in solidarity, mobilizing collectively, and advocating for justice and change. I have been working with Bangladeshi survivors for many years, and I have seen how important it is to them to get the world's recognition of their truth. It's been over 50 years since sexual violence was used as a weapon in the Liberation War of Bangladesh in 1971, and they're still fighting for this recognition today. Meanwhile, we saw perpetrators free at large and war criminals being normalized and their crimes blind-eyed, even here in Britain. In 2018, Javeda Khatun and Anwara Begum, 2 Birangana women, survivors of the Liberation War of Bangladesh, joined an international call-out with fellow survivors for a global reparations scheme at a high-level symposium organized by the Mukwege Foundation in the Netherlands. For them, this was the first and last time they attended a global network, met other survivors from different countries, and spoke out before royals and international leaders. Birangana freedom fighter Javeda Khatun demanded an answer from them in 2018. I am Javeda Khatun, she said. I am from Bangladesh. Thank you for this opportunity. We have been recognized in Bangladesh. We want the world to recognize us. We want reparations too. What will you do about it? It's now 2023. Nothing has been done about it. The world chose to dismiss their accounts of these horrific crimes as isolated incidences of a forgotten war in a distant land committed over 50 years ago. But the problem is that the same pattern of sexual violence and rape continues to be used in armed conflicts today. Unfortunately, the human cost of war does not end when the war itself ends. Marked by its devastating consequences, survivors, their families, communities, societies, and ultimately nations carry the brunt of its transgenerational trauma for generations. Also, other survivors and SEMA members have been calling for action, and it is unacceptable that their voices are often ignored. The gravity of the impact of CRSV on the lives of individuals and communities is not sufficiently identified, including concerning social stigma and discrimination. We mandate that victims and survivors must be at the center of all responses and have the right to meaningful participation in developing all measures to address CRSV. SEMA developed its call to action with support from the Mukwege Foundation out of deep disappointment and outrage with the international community's failure and indifference to stop the use of CRSV for decades. Our call is to improve the lives of those affected by the violence in the past and prevent it from happening to others at risk today and in the future. We demand your unwavering determination to end CRSV and concrete action from states to ensure justice and accountability. States should hold each other to account, including high-level leaders, and make them pay reparations. Sanctions and other punitive measures should be used as a powerful warning to those engaged in such violence or who allow it to happen. Those suspected of perpetrating or enabling the use of sexual violence should not be welcomed in the international community. And reparations must be included as an essential component of the justice process. We and other actors are working to support our fight for justice, accountability, and redress. We ask you to stand by us because survivors cannot fight this fight alone. Amplify the voice of survivors by supporting this call to action. Please sign the petition on endcrsv.org. As members of parliament, you can do even more. Through the PSVA initiative, the UK government is a key leader and supporter in the fight to end CRSV. As again highlighted today by announcing new sanctions to hold perpetrators to account. The new sanctions will be asset freeze and travel bans. Please ensure support for this critical initiative and that the UK government will act with concrete and meaningful plans and measures to eradicate rape as a war strategy. This much you owe to all survivors. Thank you so much for your attention. Go to ncrsv.org and sign the petition. Thank you very much indeed, Lisa. And now I'm going to introduce I'm excited to introduce two very special speakers in this discussion. Lisa and Raina Parsay. I'll let Sally to explain who they are and what it's about.
Hello, it's a real pleasure to introduce two very special young women. And the reason I'm introducing them is because I know they won't introduce themselves and pick themselves up. And it's important that people know exactly. Well, I think some people know, but what they've done is Marina was in Academy before and she came out and got out doing evacuation. And when she came back, she sort of committed herself to campaigning around Tigray, where she's there, and she's been doing that throughout. And any of you. The other one is completely remarkable, is Rita's. Rita went over to Sudan because she was so committed to what had happened to the integration campaign here. The two of them went over to Sudan to work in the refugee camps to get testimonies to use for prosecutions. And Rowena came back, but Rita stayed on. And she got stuck there in the war. So she came out, when was it? It started out about 2 weeks ago. And she came out on the truck out of the refugee camp. She had a passport taken away. She got held up by the military. She had ended up going through 11 checkpoints overland into Uganda and flew out. And then she needed to get here because there was a problem with the plane. She finally got here yesterday after a really scary journey. She will go back again. That's the other thing. So you better make the most of her while she's here. The two of them have done quite remarkable work. They've both seen down to Rita has faced down the Eritrean government, the Ethiopian government, the EU, and they have been absolutely tireless. So I hope you give them a really good talk. Never forget about that.
I'd like to begin by extending my thanks for hosting today's reception, to Sally and Susan, and for their labour in making today a point. Today provides an opportunity to raise awareness and stand in solidarity with survivors. In doing so, I would like to reflect on the lives of the over 120,000 Tigrayan women and girls whose bodies were used as a tool to perpetuate the occupation. As a tactic of war to torture and terrorize victims. Sexual violence remains the signature of the moment of life. Sexual violence can no longer be viewed as a tragic consequence of war. The harm, silence, and shame that women experience in war is pervasive, and its redress almost non-existent. The reality for survivors in Tigray and those displaced throughout Sudan, Kenya, and Djibouti is one of chaos. Often left unaccounted for, unprotected, and in many cases, outcast and stigmatized by society. The testimonies of survivors noted in the book written by Rita, Sally, and I speak of the trauma beyond the immediate violence. Some speak of yearning for justice, or to compel and propel us into action. Action to end impunity and hold perpetrators, whether state, non-state, or individual, of crimes such as gang rape, wanton infection with HIV, sexual enslavement, and impregnation, to alter the bloodline to account. Action to ensure resources that aid victims' recovery from physical and psychological trauma, terror, and devastation. Action to ensure resources, systems, and structures and programs to help reinstate survivors' livelihood, self-worth, and confidence for holistic programs of intervention. Accountability must mean continuously listening to the voices of victims, building support structures and pathways based on their rights, needs, dignity, and capabilities, and measuring the relevance of ongoing interventions through their perceptions and lived experiences. Instances of extreme violence orchestrated and committed by the state and non-state actors, much like the case of Tigray, Rwanda, Myanmar, and countless others by intervention. Preventing sexual violence in conflict rests upon a renewed global action by regional and international actors, a collective commitment to never again to make this a reality for present and future generations. Thank you. So as Sally said, I took long time to get here. I left the refugee camps in Sudan with public transport and was returned to the camps because of the level of lawlessness in Sudan. 2 other Tigrayans and I were selected and taken off the public transport. We were told we were illegal, despite the fact that we all had residence permission together. After I resisted and told the policeman he was wrong,
and called all the relevant people to help him understand. He took out a weapon to beat us with and sent us back to the camps on a lorry. The next morning, we tried again and managed to get to the dive. In preparation for my journey to Addis, which would then bring me here, via the Amhara region, I spent the day going through my things and all the documents on my devices to ensure all the testimonies I had collected and any evidence to be used for justice was taken away. I was also forced to go through my things and ensure that anything that would reveal my Tigrayan identity was not on me, because women, Tigrayans in that area, were brutally abused and killed because of their Tigrayan identity. With great guilt that I abandoned the refugees I've been with last year, I began my journey to Temba on the border of Ethiopia and Sudan. It took half a day to get a visa and transport to London. Once I received my visa, I set off, and I passed 11 Ethiopian National Defence Force checkpoints. Some of the women I had interviewed were raped, gang raped, and held in sexual slavery, systematically by these forces. Not one of them has received justice. The men that had raped them had not been held accountable. I felt rage every time that my ID was checked by these men. All I could think was, who did you rape and what for? I have interviewed many brave women who wanted justice and were willing enough to speak to me as long as their name wasn't revealed publicly. Women whose stories I couldn't include in the book. Their suffering has a great range and is incredibly difficult to understand. One woman was doubly victimized. She was held in sexual slavery in northern Tigray by Eritreans and then was raped while trying to cross the border by Ethiopian National Defence Forces, having made all the way the journey all the way to southern Ethiopia. This woman became pregnant as a result and was coerced by the community around her to keep the child, otherwise she would be sent to hell. She gave birth to a child whom she loves deeply, but has to battle with herself 1,000 times over to give her away for adoption. She doesn't believe anyone can care for this child that she can, but it also always reminds her of the horror that she experienced. She mentioned that people that knew in the area that she was raped, they would refer to her child as half good, half evil. None of her family members knew what happened to her. She said she wanted to dig herself into the ground at the idea of telling them. What will happen to this child, to the woman going forward? What is their fate with this level of stigma and impunity? Women in Western Tigray, Northern Tigray, Eastern Tigray, women from Iran, an indigenous minority I come from, are still under the occupation of Eritrean forces and Amhara. They still live in terror. Women in parts of Tigray that are no longer occupied continue to endure the violence that comes from post-conflict situations. I'm no more worthy of safety than anyone else. I wanted to stay in the camps with the women, with the refugees, but I made the journey here because all of the women that I spoke to so incredibly bravely shared their stories with me and trusted me to pass their stories on to you. And they're relying on you to end this culture of impunity and give them justice. They're still in a refugee camp waiting for justice.
We have a very, very, very short amount of time left. So I'm going to call our next panelist. One final speaker but sorry about now, you better say. So our next speaker, who I like to sit Dr. Taza Longway, who is the Advocacy Director of CSW, will be speaking about violence inflicted on young women abducted by those private. Thank you very much.
It's a privilege to join such an diverse panel discussing a war crime for which transparency and justice remain elusive to so many. As a person of African descent, I am particularly dismayed that today's event occurs against the backdrop of continuing violations. I would like to actually highlight the situation in central Nigeria as opposed to northeastern Nigeria, where Boko Haram operates. There, CSW recently delivered psychosocial and still delivering psychosocial and trauma workshops to survivors of conflict affected states. And I'll be using events in southern indigenous states as examples. Indigenous communities in this predominantly Christian area are experiencing armed attacks and more recently kidnappings for ransom on an almost daily basis. The violence is perpetrated by an irregular armed faction comprised of men and has been occurring in the case of southern Kaduna since 2011, increasing it exponentially after 2015 and an additional surge following the conclusion of the recent elections. Religion and ethnicity are either instrumentalized as a rallying point or are the raison d'etre of armed non-state actors operating in a region where ethnicity generally correlates with religion. This neglected conflict is often referred to as clashing between rival communities, yet the daily reality for able-bodied male villagers consists of patrolling their localities with rudimentary weapons to at best ward off a militia attack, or at the very least to provide early warnings, enabling as many people as possible to escape death or mass destruction. Abductees are forcibly marched into forest camps where casual brutality is unleashed, with beatings, mutilations, and executions occurring even after extortionate payments. Psychological torture continues following this, as they are contacted randomly on the phone lines which were used during ransom negotiations. Untold numbers of female abductees suffer sexual violence. Few speak openly due to the residual stigma inherent and a deep but unwarranted sense of shame. During workshops and one-to-ones in November 2022, a young mother who was seized from her home and confined with her daughter spoke of enduring beatings and the mock hanging of her child that left bleeding abrasions in her neck. She was subsequently gang raped repeatedly for a week. An ordeal that began after she was forced to walk to the area in the camp where victims' corpses were dumped following summary execution, and was told to say her final prayers. Her abductors later mocked her husband and father, informing him she was now their closest one. Weeks later, she discovered she was pregnant. Her husband's family turned against her, encouraging him to send her away if the child was born within a certain time. Fortunately, he did not comply. An abducted student who returned her parents became increasingly withdrawn, refused to eat, as her pregnancy progressed and eventually died in labor. Another survivor said her captors regularly threatened to sell her on to Boko Haram to be forcibly converted. Attempts were also made to desensitize her to arbitrary violence, to read deeply at the impact of her ordeal, which causes her to fly into her countries, rages, and react with violence to any male approaches. We also learned of instances of male rape so severe that survivors were hospitalized on release and were obliged to use incontinence for extended periods. The extreme stigma surrounding this phenomenon means it is spoken of even less than the rape of female captives. To conclude, unaddressed CRSV is devastating communities across central Nigeria. The violence is now metastasized, spreading to other regions and taking on an ethnic hue in the predominantly Muslim Northwest, with similarly incalculable consequences for the mental and emotional well-being of survivors and affected communities. It it is also contributing to the steady unraveling of the remaining social fabric of defense as the chronic absence of justice militates against peace and reconciliation. Thank you.
And now we can introduce Rebecca Tinsley from Waging Peace, just for a final extremely short message if you can. We're all due to be outside of this room in 2 minutes time.
19 years ago, Lord Lawson and I went to El Janina in Darfur, and I interviewed dozens of young women and girls who had been raped by the Janjaweed, who have rebranded themselves as the Rapid Support Force and who are back in business. It is with shame and frustration that I stand here 19 years later and tell you that I am hearing once again the same testimony, the same vile racial abuse that is being hurled, especially at girls between the ages of 12 and 17 who are specifically being targeted by the Janjaweed in El Janina today as we speak. Yesterday, I met a group of 80 people from Darfur who have recently escaped. They told me every single one of them had lost members of their family just in the last few weeks. And I said, how many members of your family? 8, 10, 12. But here's what else they told me. Within 28 kilometers of El Janina, where 250,000 people live, there are French soldiers just across the border in Chad. Now, the United Kingdom is the pen holder at the UN Security Council at the moment. Wouldn't it be a good idea if they proposed a resolution condemning this violence and mandating, with a Chapter 7 mandate, those French soldiers who are sitting there 28 kilometers away with nothing better to do, to create a humanitarian corridor, to provide aid to those people in Darfur who have not had food or water or energy or medicine for 3 months? Wouldn't it also be a nice idea if instead of these fine words we talk about human rights, if we used our position at the UN Security Council this month to give those French soldiers the power to create a safe zone there in El Janina? Why is it that the UK has not followed the United States in sanctioning all of the companies that both the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese Armed Forces have? Why aren't we doing that? The real leverage on these vile people who are killing thousands of people, and believe me, we have no idea the numbers. The real leverage lies in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, where both of them have all their bank accounts. This isn't just about racism, it just isn't just about power, it's about money. We have the power to do something about it. And members of Parliament in this room, I beg you, please act.
Give your testimony, talk about your work, and add to the call for action, for an end, an elimination to sexual violence, conflict, and for support and justice for all of the survivors. I'm really sorry that we haven't got longer to spend reflecting on what we've heard and processing what we've heard this afternoon, but that is unfortunately the nature of parliamentary room meetings. I therefore need to ask you to clear this room very quickly if you can. And just a request from our brilliant hospitality team, who work very hard, if you don't need properly under your chairs, to pop it on the trays over on that side, if you can. Thank you very much indeed. Oh yeah, so please pick up a service on your way out. We have it already done so.